All right, that went relatively fast. Now here it is. This is the cut piece. I cut off obviously the small end. What you're going to want to do though is you want to have this edge as level as possible. So if you got any residue from when you cut it, mine kind of cut at an angle and it was a little bit off kilter. All I use is just a cheap grinder with either a diamond bit or anything that you can use to grind that down flush. Now how this works is you're going to remember, find the bushing. The bushing has find the one that has the lip on the inside. That fits in there perfect, okay? What you're gonna do is, and it actually kind of falls in there if you need to, put that in there. Put this in and press this down as far as it'll go, okay? And then what you're going to want to do, I mean, that sits in there perfectly. So when you put in resin, you don't have to worry about this tilting from one side or the other. Okay? So what I do then is, let me get a black Sharpie, okay? And I just try to make reference points of where I need to cut this off with another hacksaw. Okay, so I'm sure you can figure it out by now what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take this apart and I'm going to cut that off with a hacksaw, and then that bottom mechanism is almost set. Okay, just a couple little other tips that I might give you to seat that in there a little bit better to make sure the epoxy holds real well. But let me cut this off first and I'll be right back. So it's finally looking like something here. All right, I cut this off, and obviously we cut this off. Now what's nice is, okay, remember when we put this together, there's a lip in that bushing in the inside of this. What we're going to do is put that lip on the top side. Again, if you take a look real close, there's a little bit of slop in there. So if it's on the top side, that gives the ability for resin to seep in that and also adhere to it, okay? And then if you take a look at this, put the two pieces in here, this thing is, I mean, man, it doesn't get any better than that. That thing fits in there perfectly. I mean, and you can get the gist of it right now, how that's going to operate, okay? And one little trick that I should tell you before we set the epoxy is make sure that you get this in the right way. Don't put this in the opposite way, because what you want to do is those threads are going to act as like a bonding agent. Once that's in there, that epoxy will be able to adhere around that and stick very, very well. But what I would do first is I would take my Dremel. Let me see if this is in focus. Okay, I would take my Dremel, and what I would do is, not where the flange is, score this with this type of bit. Again, I don't know what that type of bit is, but do some little score marks in both this, okay? You can probably put a little bit of score marks in this. Actually, it's probably better to put score marks this way, going with the threads on this, okay? And then also, if you'd like, try and just take it and do a little bit of little score marks on the inside of this also. So when that epoxy sets, it's just like a leash plug. When you look at a lot of the leash plugs, they have like a little bit of a gap in there that's cut out so the resin holds. Exact same concept. So let's go ahead. I'm going to score those up, and I mean, this is basically done. You guys can probably figure out how to epoxy it, but I will show you. You're probably going to want to tape certain things off and such, so I will show you how that works here in a second also. Okay, let me score this. I'll be right back. Everything is scored now, and I am prepping everything for the two-part epoxy, and I'm just using basically regular surfboard epoxy that I use. The nice thing about the epoxy on this is if you have like I use both a slow, a fast, and a West Coast fast. You can actually use a West Coast fast to set this because it's basically all metal. You won't have to worry about too much warping at all with this, okay? So, I mean, this little thing is in there so tight that that's not going to warp, okay? But I scored everything outside of this. underside of this, just underneath that flange. You don't have to score where that flange is, and you'll see it once you purchase one of these. And I scored on the inside of this. Now, another little trick I wanted to show you is take your heat resistant tape. I'm prepping the threaded part. If you can see it, there's a little bit of a lip here. And when that fits in here, that lip is kind of exposed. Okay, which is beneficial for us right now, because what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of heat resistant tape and we're going to wrap it right on that little lip there. Make sure it's good and tight. Okay, and then what you're going to want to do is, like I said, make sure it's good and tight, and then make sure that's crimped in there real well so no epoxy can get in that. Okay? And we're going to take another piece of tape and put it on this bottom side. Okay? Now what you can do is, you don't want a lot of this hanging over. It's okay to have a little bit hanging over, but what I do is I just kind of tear it and then tuck a little bit into the threads. But again, you don't want like half an inch of that stuff sitting there, because you want them threads to be some of those threads exposed to the epoxy itself also. So you can basically, again, get the adhesion that you need in there. Okay? Now all I'm going to do is put on my rubber gloves. I'm going to mix up a 2-part epoxy. And what you would do first is take this piece, and you can either brush on a little bit of epoxy right here, or you can dip it in the epoxy, and then again have rubber gloves on obviously, and then slide this part in first. Again, they got that little bit of a gap. You can see all my score marks in there. It's going to adhere perfectly to that. Okay, so that gives adhesion there. And then what you're going to do is, if you wish, you can either pour a little bit in there. Obviously you're going to have that hole from there. You're going to want to put a little bit more than you're thinking in there, because that hole is going to get filled out. One thing I should mention is please tape it from the bottom real well also. And then you're just going to pour in the epoxy. You're going to set all this in and press it down as far as it'll go. If there's some seepage, just kind of wipe it off, and then, I mean, you're set. That's it. That part will be done. Okay? I'm going to go do that for you right now, and then I'll show you what we need to do next on the stem. So we are fresh from the glassing room. I just put in a 2-part epoxy. I didn't use West Coast Fast like I said I was. I just used the traditional Fast. Anybody who knows me knows I am a big believer in the green room resin. I love that stuff. It's perfect. Anyway, one thing that you have to do is make sure this is seated in here real well. There's a little bit, it's recessed a little bit, which is fine. That's perfect. Okay, and you can actually use this little bit of tape for a handle. One thing that I did realize though, after I glassed it, it doesn't matter how well, oh, this is slimy, you tape this off. I had a lot of seepage out of the hole outside of the tape. So it was probably your best bet to basically grind your shoe like you're going to, bevel the edges and stuff, and fill this in first with a 5-minute epoxy. And then that way there's no type of seepage, and then you know for sure that you have enough resin in here, because there's only one way out, and that's from the top. And the way I did it, there could be, I don't think it is, but it could be compromised where all of it rushed out, which I know is not all of it rushed out the sides of this, and which I know is not the case. Okay, but just for, you know, for argument's sake, let's fill this in first with 5-minute epoxy. Grind it all down. Probably best to do your shoe beveling also before you epoxy that. Okay, so we're going to put this off to the side. Take off my glove. Well, I guess I really don't have to. But now we're going to take the stem. Okay, we're going to take the stem, and all you need to do with this stem is take a hacksaw and cut just a little bit below that thread. But be very, very careful about where you're cutting that. It's probably a best bet to take some tape and cover up these threads. Just in case you get an accidental slip of the hacksaw, you're not hitting any threads. All right, we'll take a hacksaw and cut that off, and basically it's just going to be a matter of, once the epoxy sets, it's just going to be a matter of assembly. Okay, I'm going to cut this off and I'll show you what we do next.